Hello, my name is Paige Pierman. Welcome to the Self-Healing Revolution, where ancient wisdom and modern science meet. I own an integrative and Ayurvedic wellness practice based in Louisville, Kentucky, where I teach online courses, health coaching, and run retreats. I put together this summit in hopes that many people who aren't aware of self-healing can begin to learn some new information. And I've learned over a decade that it takes many different approaches sometimes to find the one that works best for you. And I really believe in a full integrated mind, body, spirit approach. So with that, I hope you learn to biohack your body, master your mind, and elevate your soul. I am so honored today to welcome you to Patrick. Patrick is the owner of syncedwithnature.com, a consulting platform dedicated to providing best practices and success factors for individuals and businesses. He specializes in environmental and regenerative building wellness, utilizing methodology-based approach. Over the past 30 plus years, Patrick has worked with some of the largest Fortune 500 organizations, providing business and technology consulting services. He's trained in problem-solving techniques and methodologies to properly implement complex solutions. He does health assessments, environmental home assessments, EMF mitigation, mold and chemical sensitivities, medical tourism, sleep and airway assessment, holistic dentistry, and regenerative building consulting. I know that's a lot of information to take in, but he is a very multi-talented man. And I'm so excited, Patrick, for you to join me to talk about grounding today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so just to start off, for people who may have never heard of grounding, what is grounding? And just share your knowledge around grounding and how you yourself got into grounding.
Well, grounding to me was, a lightning rod in the backyard of the house, or being grounded in the electrical system, or maybe being grounded as a person energetically. And then I discovered through mistake that being in nature or on the ground, or especially in water or ocean water in particular, I felt better. And then after time, I started kind of digging into why and realized this concept of earthing and grounding was something very real and electrical and something really physics based that could be explained. So
Mhm.
being the analytical thinker I am, I guess, I wanted to find out what it was that was making me feel better.
Right.
And you read in my bio that I have a background in environmental sciences, and I've always been very interested in the earth and how it relates to human wellness.
Right.
And as a business consultant, I had this methodology approach that I learned at work. They trained us how to think with the process of deduction and induction. So I started thinking, okay, well, why do I feel better? And then I started looking into it online, and there's all kinds of great stuff around earthing and grounding. So that started my process of, reading and researching and understanding this biomechanical transfer of energy into the body, free electrons.
Right.
So
And so what was actually happening with you at the time, and what other things were you trying when you discovered that being in nature, grounding, and being in the water was actually healing for you? What was happening at that time?
well, I was dealing with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS. I mean, it's kind of a controversial acronym, and it's not accepted widely, but it's becoming an area around long COVID, Lyme, and especially mold sufferers that have this chronic response that the body can't stop. It's like a cascade of inflammation, and it
Mhm.
could happen in the brain and neurologically, or the gut, or thyroid, or whatever it is. But it's more or less an autoimmune condition where it just keeps going, and you need outside intervention to help. So I was trying everything, different doctors, different countries, different therapies. And at the time I was exposed to the mold, and then I had Lyme issues while I was healing because I was exposed to a tick. I couldn't get any answers. So I just kind of kept pushing through. And eventually I realized that the only way I'm fundamentally going to feel better is to sink back to nature. I used to say that I'm going to sink to nature. I don't feel good. And essentially I was in an inflamed chronic state of inflammation is what it was. So um, this is exactly what the body does. It goes through an inflammatory state. There's something that doesn't belong inside you, whether it's a toxin or it's a pathogen, and they cause an inflammatory response in the body. And then you lose the ability to manage other parts of the body in terms of energetics. So digestion and sleep and recovery and your immunity, they all require this certain level of energy.
Right.
And if
So I
you,
call it like total body burden. There's like, it's okay. The body might be able to manage if it was just physical, but then when you add in multi-layered aspects to healing, the body gets to a point where it's got a total body burden where it says, I've had enough, or it's like the rain barrel effect where it just spills over and it can't take anymore. And so you take something like mold or Lyme or some of these more serious inflammatory symptoms start to emerge that you can no longer manage. And is that how that felt in terms of what happened with you?
yeah, absolutely. I was pushing myself to the limit prior to getting exposed to mold. So not understanding that concept, I was since a teenager, I was dealing with, stress or the adaptability to stress. I just remember not being able to adapt well to certain stressful situations.
Mhm.
And my response would be to do things that raise dopamine, which whether it was alcohol or driving fast, or just doing things that through exercise, like riding too far, too fast, working out just to get the endorphin rush, but not understanding I was adding to the total load of stress because my body needed much more rest than it needed to be pushed. So basically, the Lyme mold situation was a breaking point. To your point on the total load, so I
Yeah.
call it an oxidative stress stack. So when I developed these little methodologies over time, I was thinking while I was healing all these years, like what could I do to make it simple for people to understand this big ocean of information?
Mhm.
So I came up with what's called an oxidative stress stack. So picture a stack of paper.
Well, I want to get into that, but I still want to stay with the grounding for a minute, just because I want people to fully understand what that means,
Okay.
why it works. So we'll definitely get into kind of the stacking the oxidative stress and looking at that total body burden. But so you had these symptoms, you began to be in nature, you started using your own analytical mind to study like what was happening. Are grounding and earthing, and again, you're deeper in this world than me. Are they the same thing, or is there a difference between what's considered grounding and earthing?
Well, I mean, earthing, I would just look as an activity where you're physically going on the earth.
Mhm.
So you touch the earth, whether it's your bare feet or even through cotton socks or wool, something natural is going to ground you. And I
Mhm.
even believe being close to the ground, even if you're not touching directly, has an impact better than not being close to the earth, for example.
Mhm.
But grounding in itself technically is the electrical congruency when things come into synchronicity in terms of electricity. So they are a little different in my eyes, and but the terminology is one and the same. It's just getting out into nature and letting your body or the surface areas touch the ground, or you can use some tools that are sold from different manufacturers to do it in the house or at work or places like an RV.
Mhm.
So,
So, are there different methodologies around grounding, or is it, just again utilizing different, um, like again, different tools or techniques, or because like you said, there's just earthing, which is basically being connected to the earth, but grounding could be what much more than that. So, are there different methodologies, or it's pretty much standard thing to ground?
well, in terms of a methodology, there's the best practices. So if you want to ground and you want to do it in terms of best practice, you're going to be in ocean water. So
Okay.
if you were one of my clients or I was giving advice to somebody who's dealing with a chronic state of inflammation or illness, I would say spring water and I would say ocean water would be
Is
best.
that because of the negative ions? What is it about water that, in terms of grounding, that makes it the most beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically bringing the ionization, the electron transfer from the earth, which comes from the sun essentially, goes through the ionosphere, which is 60 miles up. It's a
Mhm.
layer of the atmosphere. And then the positive exchange of ions, the negative exchange of ions separate, and the negative ions are on the earth, the crust of the earth. And lightning, when it strikes the earth, actually charges it. So your body intuitively just pulls energy when it needs it, and it will distribute disparate energy that maybe you're picking up from man-made sources. So you might
Your
have a
body like intuitively does that. It already has this intuitive knowing of when it needs to discharge or receive.
yes, it's just to me like breathing.
Mhm.
It's an automatic response,
Like it's
and
an automatic response
yeah,
of that.
absolutely.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's really cool. So if you were really wanting to do the best practices, like let's say you had mold or you had Lyme or you were dealing with this total body burden, like number one would just be like to just get into the ocean or get near spring water.
Yeah, I mean, using this methodology approach, the process of deduction. So the first thing I do is I look at what I call the three E's. So energy, emotions, and environment. So I ask people to try to simplify things because it's such a, I spent years trying to try all these biohacks and testing and different coaches and doctors. And ultimately, it was just me being in tune with myself and saying what works and what doesn't. So you start with what works. And I just noticed, especially going down to the Caribbean, that in Mexico, that my body would within a short period of time start to feel more balanced and centered. So I would start feeling better, neurocognitively, my energy levels, sleep, everything got better. So the three E's, energy, emotions, and environment, are going to allow you to say, I'm going to change my environment and see how I feel. I'm going to leave my house. How do I feel? And then the emotional piece of the component is being strong enough and having a mindset that allows you to do things out of your comfort zone, like move.
Right. But going back to the environment, I have a question because we've talked about this, like we've had some interactions just leading up to this interview. There are a lot of people, right, that are living millions and millions of people living in large, dense populations, take like New York City or large cities in the US. Some people in cities that are smaller, and then you do have some people that live in rural or out in nature. But for those who are in an urban environment and they really can't escape it because they're in their 9 to 5 job, if you are dealing with somebody in that situation who just really doesn't have access to be, in the ocean, or I mean, some people might live in coastal towns, right? But we have the large part of the population is in large cities and even, not near the ocean. What would be the best practices in that situation? What would you recommend?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I deal with that myself. So I would go back to the Caribbean or in a southern climate where I'd have that sunshine. The 30th, the parallel is where, in the winter solstice, I guess, you want to be south so your body can absorb that UV energy that's going to provide the vitamin D. But the actual grounding is easier to do in a warm environment. So just going somewhere that's warm makes it easier to sleep outside or camp, which I did quite a bit of because it was so effective for me. I became addicted to it. But I always recommend the first stage is leave the environment and see how you feel outside of it for, if you can do a week, but 3 or 4 days, whether it's camping or going to a friend's house, an Airbnb, go somewhere else and see how you feel. So at least you can check that off the list and see if there's something impacting your health in the house, whether it's an EMF, electromagnetic frequency, a mold issue, chemical issue, or some type of geopathic stress. I even have clients that have litter boxes that they had no idea the ammonia from the urine from cats was that pervasive and impacted them that much. They just didn't understand the sensitivity.
Mhm.
But to answer your question a little more thoroughly, while you're at the house, your first order of business is your internal environment. So you want to establish your terrain so it's adapting to stress and can handle more external stressors from the environment. So concurrently, you're going to lower inflammation and you're going to work on toxicity, malnutrition, and infection. So you want to try to spend and do a little bit more intelligent thinking around what is burdening me and why can't I identify that? What can I do to intuitively through symptomology make decisions around what priorities should I focus on? Am I extremely low in one nutrient, like magnesium is a very common one, or am I just very infected with a gut infection that I can't resolve for whatever reason? So that's my suggestion is if you're stuck in this urban and this dirty, environment or matrix, I call it, focus on that. And then you could do things around EMF that are really simple, like unplug the Wi-Fi and get the phone away from the head, turn off your circuit breaker and see if it's dirty electricity in the walls impacting you.
What does that look like when you mention dirty electricity for people that don't really think of their home as dirty, right? Like, what is dirty electricity?
So dirty electricity, and again, I'm not the scientist. I just have a high level and some knowledge around these topics because they impacted me. But dirty electricity is just going to be the oscillating current that comes through the walls, through the power system or the grid that come through your walls, and they produce a frequency that's called oscillating current. So it oscillates. It's not a natural current that our body functions off of, which is direct current. Our body works off what's called direct current, point to point, when it heals or when it does anything. So
wouldn't that make like all electricity dirty electricity? I mean, really, like, would you say that most electricity really is dirty electricity? Like because
well, no, I wouldn't say that. And the reason why is because if it's grounded correctly and wired correctly, and it's not leaching into the room and creating a problem, I wouldn't call it dirty. I would say you could live in a house that's effectively clean if it's wired and protected well.
Okay.
So I work with national companies that can go out and do those assessments, and I've worked with them directly, and I've learned quite a bit about how it works for my own and for my clients and other people I refer to.
Right. So you have the environment, you have, what are the other, to go back through the E's, the environment?
The emotional piece is the mindset. Like, why am I sick? Why can't I be the person I want to be? The mindset, Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza, this concept of what your thought is what's creating your reality. It took me a long time to buy into that. And I really do believe it now more than ever that the energetic charge from that thought is a part of your burden, or it's going to help you. So if you're in a state of obsessive compulsive or some kind of repetitive thoughts that are negative or whatever it is, and we can go into Ayurvedic on why your liver gallbladder is congested or Chinese medicine, but for the most part, that's the mindset, the emotional piece, the trauma that you either have to resolve, a relationship issue, or you lost your life because of your health. You need to be focusing on the energetic piece of the emotions and how that needs to be managed as your stress burden. So energy, emotions, environments, the energy piece of that always has to be in consideration. There's energetics in your emotions. There's energetics in your environment. There's energetics within your personal body environment that are either in chaos or in harmony. So everything we do, it should be in consideration of that energetic piece. So are you grounded properly? Are you getting sun exposure? Are you connected to the circadian clock? Is your body clock aligned in rhythm?
Yeah, let's pause there too. Because I'm huge. Again, we've talked before, but I am one of the first things I do with my clients is look at their circadian rhythm, and are they in tune with their own circadian rhythm? And really, truly, like we're a little bit different in our circadian nature. Like we all need the sun, right? We couldn't live without the sun, but yet there are little nuances with each Ayurvedic energetic body type, if you will. But how, when you began to look at grounding, how did the circadian rhythm start to help you, and what realizations or ahas did you have around that?
Well, I just felt like I was restoring something. So, my brain was in this chaotic state, which we can move off the 3 E's and talk about the 3 F's.
Okay.
Fight, flight, or freeze, right? You're in fight or flight and you're frozen, you're stuck. And the question is, why you go there? And to me, you can talk about that. Again, we can go back to physics or biology, and it's the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic dominance. And you're stuck in this parasympathetic dominance. And why? Something's stressing you out, creating a cell danger response. Your body feels a threat, whether it's emotional, chemical, physical, environmental, invisible. And that stress burden is impacting you in some way. And you just need to identify that And to me, I just realized that I don't have to focus so much on all those details when I just get into nature, because I feel better.
Yeah.
And I realized what was happening to me was that my gut inflammation was impairing my digestion. My combustion and my hydrochloric acid was impaired because of my energetics.
Right. I want to pause here too, because I think that people don't understand, like when people think of stress, a lot of times they think about like work-based stress, or they think about something that was an event that happened in their life. But I don't know that people realize that just having gut-based stress can be a stressor that can cascade, like that. Um, Again, like something in your environment that you're unaware of, dirty electricity or mold, or even being exposed to Lyme is a major body stressor that has an energetic component that may not even be realized. I mean, some people get so comfortable in their pain that they don't even see it as a symptom anymore. It's like, I've lived with this for 20 years or 30 years. I've always had digestive issues. So they don't see it as a stressor. It's just become their norm.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's how I feel I was. I didn't know how I could feel.
Right.
And
And you even mentioned like with your work, like you were used to just going, like that was just a state of constant stress that you had adapted to. I mean, it sounds like you were in a state of like, okay, this is how I live. I live, working in this capacity. And that's another one too. People get really used to like always working, but never finding that downtime and not realizing until they've given 20 or 30 years of their life. I mean, I have clients that literally get to retirement. They're like, I've burned through my body. Like there's nothing left. They
yeah,
just gave of their like, I mean, I have clients, especially men too. Men tend to be, I don't want to group men and women as separate, but I find in my practice, or I've seen women seem to like look at their symptoms and come in a little bit earlier. Whereas I have seen men that just will go and go and go. It's like, they're just trying to hold it together. I think because of maybe the way that we've asked men to perform and, to show success. Right. But it's like the body will keep going as long as you keep abusing it. And then that what wasn't normal becomes your norm, and you don't have any framework or reference for that.
yeah, that's really
Like,
well put. You're just
yeah.
you're caught up in your own bubble. You're
Mhm.
so deep in the bubble that you forgot what it was like to
To
feel
even
normal.
feel normal.
Maybe even in your teenage years, or even as a child, could have been born in that fight, flight, and freeze state for a lot of reasons, right?
Mhm.
So I feel better now than I have in many years, but I also feel like I have more energy in my brain. Like I feel more intelligent, like I have more energy in the brain to process, memorize. And so like, what is IQ? I mean, to me, it's just how well your brain is functioning in terms of energetics and blood sugar balancing, or your mindset or inflammation. So
And that's another one you just mentioned, like blood sugar balancing. Like if you're always spiking your blood sugar and you crash and you spike your blood sugar, you crash, like you don't even know what it's like not to spike your blood sugar. Like that's a huge one too, just alone.
yeah, absolutely. But so here's a concept that came up with, to make it simple. Well, when the tide is high, all boats float. So picture your body, and when it's energetically where it belongs, your electron density or your chi, pranayama, or these different terms that have always been used as like, you just have great reserve energy, a strong person. Your tide is high. So
Mhm.
picture all the boats float when the tide's high. So everything's working great. But when the tide drops, there's boats that get stuck in the mud. So let's rise the tide through grounding, nutrition, sun exposure, right? Circadian matching. Let's do all the things that the blueprint of a normal or healthy human would have, just like software. I was in technology, and I always think of like how software works. It communicates and tells the body to do something. And that's what the sun does. It's information. It's not just energy. It's telling the body what time of day, what season, 24-hour cycle, the 30-day moon cycle. And it's telling your body exactly where it fits into the universe, because that's essentially, not to get kind of corny here, but we are cosmic. We integrate directly into the environment. So our body directly integrates into the atmosphere through air and through touch, through grounding, through magnetism, and of course through light. So photobiomodulation, and timing and all that. So what I realized was, when you raise the tide, all boats float. And that's what I'm doing when I'm on the ground most of the day or in the water, or
Mhm.
I'm camping and sleeping grounded, which I thought was really hard at first, but I can talk down the road a little bit about best practices around how to ground properly, because it
Yeah,
doesn't.
let's go into that more. I'd like to tease that out. I'd like to hear more about
So
how.
when I first went camping, I was kind of desperate to feel better, and my friends suggested I go camping on the beach in Mexico. It was actually in Tulum, Mexico, which is now very popular, but back then it wasn't really well known. And it was a really nice place. Once I felt comfortable and safe, which was very safe, we grounded, and my friend suggested I cut the bottom of the tent and lay directly on the earth, and like on a wool blanket, like the old days, like a cowboy might have or something, or a Mayan family might do, closer, on the ground.
So just not even the plastic, but just like cut the bottom of the tent out and just put a
Yeah.
wool blanket down. Okay.
So I did that, and it
Would the
was
plastic itself just create a barrier too? Like the
it
plastic?
does.
Okay.
It
Interesting.
does, but it's better to camp close to the ground and with the plastic than it is not to. So it's still a good idea to try to camp if you can
So
get.
like even people that are camping, I just want to slow down because there's so many people that camp, right? But they might not know that they're not getting the full benefit because there's sleeping bags and then there's the plastic. So you're
I
recommending cut the plastic at the bottom and not even sleeping bag, maybe just a wool blanket to get the full benefit.
Yeah. I mean, this was before I knew they sold grounding products.
Mhm.
So, had I had a grounding mat made out of carbon, a proper mat, I would have just laid that down and been more comfortable and so on. And, it was just an experiment. And what I'm trying to illustrate is that it was an overburden of energy my body was not used to. It was something that our ancestors did because they slept on wood or other materials that were conductive. So directly on the ground was intense, and I had to get up a lot, and I felt like my nervous system went into overdrive. My
What
bladder, my
what
bladder
was
was
what was intense about it? Was it the comfort level of laying on the ground? What made it so intense?
well, the comfort level was okay. I actually prefer a harder surface, but it was more I believe it was that my body was detoxing, because again, everything requires energy, and my body had been low in electron density, or a low in chi, let's say reserve energy, because I was always fighting and giving up electrons during my fight. I was in fight or flight because my body was
Mhm.
dealing with multiple stressors on multiple fronts:
Right.
toxicity, inflammation, malnutrition, and infection. So I was giving up all my electrons, and my body was in a state of stress due to that. But while I slept on the ground, I was receiving energy through the earth, this transfer of electrons that gave my body the ability to detox, which is essentially what we do while we sleep. Our body cleans and detoxes and does rebuild.
Right.
You're in hopefully and ideally in the three R's: rest, recuperate, and rebuild, in the parasympathetic while you're sleeping. That's the best practice. So how do you get there? And that's the question. So I got the aura ring, of course, and started utilizing that. And I started noticing after the first week or two of kind of stressful sleep outside, like I felt good in the morning,
Were
but I
you
couldn't.
sweating? Were you, what was,
Sweating,
Mhm.
getting up to urinate a lot,
Yeah.
all of those things. And eventually it kind of leveled off, where I felt like, because I was adapting to the environment, now I was getting the deep sleep. According to the aura ring, I was starting to see a much more theta wave or slow wave sleep.
Mhm.
And in the slow wave sleep is when the brain does, the lymphatics are vibrating and things are cleaning out of the brain. You're hydrating, or the spine's filling back up with fluid, I've read. You're detoxing, the body's focusing on cleaning. And that's best practice. You want to wake up feeling refreshed. You want to have your cortisol levels at a nice, ready to go, charge for the day, and not be inverted because of your circadian biology and stress, with high cortisol before bed and low cortisol in the morning. So essentially, my body's sinking to the ground bioenergetically, aligning back to the earth, the rhythms of the earth, and the sun allowed my nervous system and my endocrine system to start working in concert properly together. So this is circadian biology. It's taken me many years to understand these concepts, but um, so essentially that's why I started to feel so good, and my body could now start to focus on other things it wasn't trying to heal for many years. So now I was moving to the next level. So after one moon cycle, I started seeing strength changes, body changes, mood changes. And after two moon cycles, about 60 days outdoors, I could do 20 pull-ups, which are, the outer, hand pull-ups that I couldn't do maybe 5 or 7 before, for many years. So I was just like so astonished by how much better I was getting. I became addicted to it. And I didn't want to go back into the old lifestyle that I saw as like post-traumatic stress from my old life that brought on so much of the stress that I couldn't manage.
Right. So eventually you had to go back. And what happened when you left after that first round of, was it 60 days?
Well, it was actually 90 days outside.
Okay.
And, most of the time I would go to, places, Airbnbs and places like that. And I have a lot of friends that live in the region, Playa del Carmen and all that. So I spent every day outside, but most of them. And I went back to the big city in Chicago that year. And it took about 4 months, but I started feeling sick again. I started losing energy, and all of the old symptoms have come back very slowly, though, subtly.
Mhm.
And I wasn't aligned circadian biology wise. I wasn't going to bed on time, and I wasn't on the ground as much. I was trying to get on the ground a lot, but I ended up having to go back down to the Caribbean because I knew that was where I felt best.
Right.
And luckily enough, I did that. And again, after 4 months I felt perfect, like almost back to normal.
Oh, I
So
just would say, like, when you were down there, I mean, some people might think, well, the environment was changed, right? Like, definitely the environment, you were in nature. Did you have also like the daily stressors of life still? Like, did you still have to work down there? Because that would also be a huge component of purification.
yes.
Were you able to still work and see if that you were, or maybe at some point in this, like, um, this grounding time that you've taken for yourself, have you compared it to being able to do that and work, or versus just doing it and not working? Because work itself can be such a huge stressor. You just take that element alone out of the equation, and that could be huge. I'm
Yeah,
assuming
no,
you've done this
that's a
so many
great question.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm assuming you've done this so many times that now you can see, oh, okay, I can do this and still work and have the benefit of like living that high energetic life. Where have you seen that in the process? Because just taking work off could be such a load off of somebody's system that they could begin to heal just by that alone. Of course, I'm not undervaluing or underestimating the grounding.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the whole thing. It's just a learning lesson here. It's not like, you can't get better unless you do what I did. I just happen to be in such an inflamed state
Right.
with mold. Mold's a very difficult, mold toxin is a very difficult thing for people to overcome, especially when you have the genetic issue I have, where you
Mhm.
don't detox the mycotoxin out and it starts to accumulate.
Yeah, I have
And
that too. I'm very mold sensitive, so I understand.
yeah, so I was in such a point that I just couldn't do it anymore. So I decided to go back into that environment. And in terms of a career, I was used to working remotely. So I
Okay.
was able to pull it off, which a lot of digital, nomads do today. So it was I was very lucky in that format. But if
Right.
had I been stuck in a situation, or not stuck, but in the situation where I couldn't leave, let's say, I would have tried to leave for a week at a time, maybe every 3 months. I would have tried to go to Florida or somewhere warm and make an agreement with my job or whatever it was to try to get into nature the best you can. If not, and especially now, there are incredible tools and ways to assess your environment to mimic nature. So, is it always possible? No, but most of the time, you can get yourself pretty close if you utilize and understand the concept of getting in water. Let's say you bathe, Epsom salt baths, that types of concepts, grounding internally at the house or your backyard.
Mhm.
You can ground directly into your electrical system. You can bring a ground in through the window if you want. I know people that have a tent in the backyard. They spend a month or two outdoors because the house has mold and they need to clean and remediate the mold. So it's just, there's all kinds of factors based on your flexibility, your budget, your spouse. And, that's the thing, you have to manage all that. So that's stressful in itself,
Yeah.
but there are answers. There's always answers. And you always have to remember that grounding is, I think, fundamental, like breathing. That's how I look at it now. But you don't always have to ground as much as you have to breathe, you know?
So when you come back to the city, I mean, you live in Chicago part-time, I'm assuming. And when you come back, what are the things that you keep in play so that obviously you have these times where you put yourself in a brand new environment to heal your body. But when you are in a city environment, what are some best practices that you do on a daily basis to keep yourself, energized and vital and strong and rejuvenated?
Yeah, I mean, breathing mechanics are number one. I didn't know I had an issue with sleep due to my breathing mechanics. I had apnea, and I was like, I'm a thin guy. It doesn't make sense to me. But after looking into it and working with really solid practitioners that understand what apnea really is, obstructive apnea is something that everybody has to look at. Do you have an airway issue in the sinus cavity? Is your throat diameter too small? Is your tongue, does it have a place to go? Like you understand that concept.
Yeah.
So an airway assessment for everybody, period. And then
You find that people don't think they have any sleep apnea. I mean, in your work, that they're like, oh, I don't have sleep apnea. And then you do an airway assessment and you find out that there's a lot more going on than they think.
yeah, so I mean, once you have the airway assessment down, you know whether you're breathing while you're sleeping. So when I'm back in Chicago, I notice if I'm not grounded as much, my body becomes inflamed. And the inflammation is what triggers a lot of the apneas. For whatever reason, I don't have all the answers, but I know there's a connection there. And when I'm grounded a lot and in that environment, I feel like it's almost like the collagen structures tighten because you have the energy to feed the skin. So it's like you feel less loose or something. And I feel like the tongue and my tongue posture gets, more correct when I'm in that nicer environment, cleaner environment.
Right.
So I'm more astute to my breathing mechanics and my sleep. That's number one. What's going on with sleep? I keep an eye on it. I use the Aura ring, but I also have a pulse oximeter that I think is best practice. If you have a good dentist nearby, which is another reason I focus on dental in this area, because it's such a common denominator and sickness, is this breathing mechanics. This whole idea of airway having blockages is so pervasive. You have to address that. So moving forward, I also make sure my environment isn't dirty in terms of too many frequencies, because I feel like when you're inflamed and your body's interstitial fluids, lymph system, and blood, and these different fluids are not correct in terms of their pHs. And this is where I use my fish tank methodology, or I call it clean the fish tank. So think of a fish in a dirty, tank of water, and you're not going to heal it by putting more food in the water. You're going to make it worse. And if the filters are clogged, your elimination organs, kidneys and your liver, and your colon, for example, if those things are clogged, all that waste you want to get out of you to clear the system so the pHs can be correct within the fluids, so your electrical system's working well internally, then, I follow that. I keep clean. I go to the sauna, I eat clean. My diet in particular is very low inflammatory. So I follow a FODMAP diet mostly. My coach has been very good about keeping me online about how my gut is my primary. The microbiome and the gut are the primary.
Yeah, this is also Ayurvedic, keeping the gut, the Agni strong, the digestive fire, the elimination working properly, the lymphatic system pumping, getting the sewage out of the body.
Yeah, and then eating the right foods at the right time are very important. Making sure you chew the food and it's not going down and undigested or unchewed, because that's more stress. And then protein digestion. Of course, you brought up combustion. If you're not ionizing your proteins, you're just throwing undigested food particles into the small intestine. And now you're creating an environment where you have critters that can come and eat. So there's a continual process of malabsorption and not digesting food, because you're not ionizing, you're not chewing it well, you're choosing your wrong foods. And then you're not essentially getting electrons, which is what food is, into the body to feed yourself. And there's where grounding helps, because if you have a terrible digestive tract for all these other reasons, whether it's too many antibiotics or too much stress, fight or flight, or sleep apnea, causes and keeps your gut in a state of dysbiosis. Sleep apnea is directly connected to dysbiosis.
Mhm.
So you're stuck in this, this secular thing because of diet. So again, when I'm back in Chicago or anywhere else, my diet's very important. I'm living like our ancestors as best I can, and then I go on this anti-inflammatory kick. But I try to ground my body through a grounding mat. I have a grounding pillow, and I try to make sure the environment's clean. So especially power lines. So if I stay at an Airbnb or a friend's house, or I stay at a family member's house, I've tested it. I have my own meters, and I'm very familiar on whether I can deal with the EMFs. But I noticed
You
that
find yourself ever having to just leave and say, like, it's too much for my system and just like, I'm gonna have to go stay somewhere else?
absolutely.
Mhm.
Environment, the three E's: environment, emotions, and energy. So I always tell people, you don't feel good, get out of the environment, see how you feel. Sometimes it's just the house you change. Other times you got to get out of the city and go somewhere else because of the plume of EMFs, electromagnetic fields, especially now after the 5G installation is much higher. And then
Mhm.
you've got counties. You can go somewhere in the country, leave the state, go south. Some people do well up north, up in the
Yeah,
uh,
you were saying you always go south. I was gonna ask you like what your opinion was for people going north.
there's a guy named Matt Blackburn that moved up in Idaho, and he does really well. And I just seem to need a lot of sunlight. I feel like it's because of my inability to digest as efficiently as I should, because of chronic gut issues, susceptibilities around why my gut is not as effective or isn't efficient, is related to all the stressors we talked about. But I
Right.
feel like the sun and the earth are part of feeding me. Like that's how it feels. Like I assimilate my nutrients through the ground. Like it, and I read about yogis, and I know yogis in India. I've watched videos, and I've met other people who say that they eat a lot less when they live in a warm environment.
Mhm.
So when I live in Mexico, over time, I noticed that I need like a third of the amount of calories.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
You feel the same. So I always wondered why, and it makes sense that you're absorbing energy from the outside. So
Well, but we also eat, so Ayurvedically, the summer being the pitta season, like when we go into those warmer months, granted you're going south. So it's like if you were to look at like 4 seasons, that would be different. But when we're when our days are longer, we're utilizing more energy, because if you think about the circadian rhythm, right, the days are longer rather than shorter in the winter. In Ayurveda, the Agni actually goes up, but we're eating very nutrient dense foods. So if you think about like the 3 seasons diet, there's a lot of when you're eating plants and fruits and things that are in harvest, especially like plant based during that time, like what's available in the summer is quite different than the winter. It's a very nutrient dense diet. So you don't necessarily have to eat the heavier foods, which would be like bone broths. People in the winter would eat nuts or seeds, right? They're high dense foods called the sweet, sour, and salty taste. But in the summer, you have the bitter and the astringent taste. They're more purifying, but they're very nutrient dense. So it's just a matter of like, what would be right for your body type at the right moment for you. But for some people, I mean, at least Ayurvedically, that cold quality, or they would do better in northern, like some really strong pitta body types would do very, very, very well in a northern climate, because they're pitta, they already have that quality of heat. So, the opposite quality would bring them into balance.
yeah, I mean, if you look at mitochondria and you start looking at like Dr. Jack Kruse, who I've seen, I followed him, I went to his camp in Louisiana, and he talks about the mitochondrial DNA and how your body, based on your ancestry, is going to utilize energy.
Mhm.
So, I'm talking at a very high level here, but this William Walsh is a researcher that he studies and focuses on the mitochondrial DNA versus the nuclear DNA. And
Mhm.
he's just like, well, if you're Caucasian and you were up in the mountains and your ancestry was trying to keep you warm versus somebody down by the equator who was really in fight or flight when they needed to be, when they were running from a lion or something, let's say. So there's different ways to utilize energy, and there's different types of ancestral body types that would make sense on why someone of a certain origin would like thrive in a different environment. And
Mhm.
I like the north. Like I feel good because I feel like my ancestry, and especially in the summer, I feel better. But it's just probably because of the impairment that I dealt with over the span of time, whether it was self-inflicted or it was from medical injury or whatever it was, medications or antibiotics that created this issue where I was just low in energy because my inability to digest. So again, back to the microbiome, back to digestion. Are you fundamentally eating, and are you absorbing and bringing your nutrients in effectively? Because that's, I think, why grounding becomes so essential, and sun exposure to a certain point. And I think that's the essence of it. Are you digesting well? Do you have combustion? Are you malnourished? How thrown off is your circadian clock, which dictates the cortisol release? As you know more than I do as an Ayurvedic practitioner, the time of day dictates your endocrine system. So, that's how I look at it. So that's why I always tell people, just focus on the simplicity of all of this. Don't try to look into all the details and have to, put into the granular, the reasons why you heal. So if you feel better in a certain environment, just focus on your life, do what feels right, and continue it, and follow the fundamental rules of breath, air, water, hydration, the principles that I call order, rhythm, and timing. So it's another one of these things that's on the Synced with Nature website, but it talks about the order of things. So if you want to talk about, let's say, mineral order, magnesium, the spark plug of life, it's the conductor of the entire orchestra of minerals on the periodic table. It's if it's out of place and you're low in magnesium, everything is off. So that's
it has 300 plus properties that it helps regulate in the body. So when it has 300 properties that it's addressing, then it's the most needed nutrient that can't be ignored.
Yeah, I mean, magnesium. So, your electrolytes, what do? They conduct electricity. Why do I feel better in the ocean? Because it's salt. The salt water conducts electricity versus the lake, which still is great, but it's much more effective to have this conductivity. So I guess what we're trying to say is that everybody's different, and everyone's different in their season of healing and their priorities, what they need to focus on in terms of removing those layers of stress.
Yeah, I like that you say that, because that's really important, honestly. I mean, I've brought a lot of people on this summit, and I believe that intuitively people kind of know where they need to be in their healing, but what is right, the timing is so important when you're looking at your healing, where you're coming at it from, what angle you're coming at. Because I think sometimes why people aren't healing is they're coming at it from an angle that they're repeating the same angle, and there's another aspect of their healing that they're not seeing. They're, I mean, a diet could be one of them. People give well-meaning advice around diet all the time. And I think that what they don't realize is that advice might work really well for one person, but that advice may not be what's best for another person. I mean, one would be ketogenic. They're just coming, like, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of that. But with that being said, one of the reasons people get to a block where they can't move forward in their healing, I hope they hear this on the summit, is you're probably looking at it, but you're not seeing all the different layers or how multi-layered it is. And that there's one component that you could bring into your healing. It's like a keystone, like you bring in that one thing and then everything else can start to fall in place. At least as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I see this happen. It's like, I get a full picture of what's happening. I know you do this too, right? Like you're looking at the whole system, but like you mentioned, like orally or breath, like for one person, it could be just like correct the breath, correct the sinuses, correct the airway passages, and like everything opens up for their healing. Dental could be one. You address like the microbiome of the mouth, not even the gut, but just start with the mouth. And that could be the key to their healing. It's just so multi-layered.
Right. Yeah. So I think so it would, and that's what stresses people out. It adds another layer of stress to think of all of these potential problems. But if you follow the order, rhythm, and timing method, and you talk to an experienced practitioner, for example, if you do the best you can at trying to identify your layers of stress, and that includes emotional issues too, but If you're not breathing and your carbon oxygen ratio is imbalanced, that triggers a sympathetic response. It's the first thing to trigger your sympathetic response, actually, is when the body feels like it's going to die from oxygen deprivation. Your body goes into fight or flight. So while you're sleeping, if you're not breathing, then your body goes into fight or flight, and it causes the digestive tract, everything to go into shock. So if you're not breathing during the day, your breathing mechanics are off. Like right now, I'm talking a lot. I'm probably not breathing as well as I could. So if you focus on the fundamental things like grounding and breath work and light exposure, time of day, and you do those things religiously, you're starting to remove those layers of metabolic stress that are occurring within the body. So then you rise the tide, and then your body can start to focus on the boats that are still stuck in the mud. Let's say you have some biliary patency, calcification in the bile, and that's something that circadian biology is not going to fix. You need an intervention. Sometimes you need medical intervention, and you just have to decide when and where. Or I hate to say it, if you need antibiotics, you have to take them at times. But you have to decide, but you have to try to do the best you can to give the body the energy it needs to heal, to sleep, to generate ATP. I try to look at energy in three phases: how to get it into the body. Are you getting it in effectively through the skin, the gut, the ground? Are you assimilating it well through the electron chain transport? Is it going through the pH, through the fluids properly? Are your pHs off? Is your fish tank dirty, so it's throwing off the energetic flow, the pathways? So if everything's clean, and then you have your reserve energy, that is probably my biggest issue still with energy, is I don't maintain my charge.
So yeah, so Ayurvedically, you Ayurvedic, like you probably have good prana. You may even have upper or lower levels of tejas. So like prana being your life force, tejas being your digestion, right? Like kind of making sure digestion stays on court. But ojas is that deep immunity. And that's only attainable. This is just from an Ayurvedic perspective when we talk about energy. But ojas is only attainable when the prana, or the life force, is moving freely and properly and really well. Tejas is working really well. Then ojas can be restored. But like you said, when you go through these deep periods of 60 or 90 days, that ojas gets built up, but then you go back, when we all go back into our environment, then ojas gets depleted in our modern day world. And that's like a big part of, in my own evolution and my own practice. I believe there's really quick ways to build ojas. One of the fastest ways to build that deep reserve or strength, I believe, is through sleep, like really good quality sleep. It's like
number one. Absolutely.
It's number one. So like when I look at people and I'm like, okay, if you're not getting a good quality, or like some people just think they can like function on very little sleep, I'm like, okay, let's look at this. Because people don't realize that that's one of the quickest ways to give their body like rejuvenation, restoration, the R's that you were talking about, those 3 R's. And
no, I think that's a good time to talk about retreats. So I was involved in a hotel project it's a hotel being built actually in Tulum. And I'm not going to bring up the name just yet. I'll put it on.
Yeah, that's fine. It's okay. They'll find it in time.
But the hotel is designed for healing. And I tried to integrate the concept of taking bad frequencies out and bringing good ones in. Light, water, magnetism, sound therapy, ionization, all of the cool things like grounding the bed, blocking the walls in terms of using German paint for EMF resistance, and then mold resistant construction with building biology. It's been a great learning experience for me. Yeah. So the retreats themselves that we're gonna perform, Mexico, probably in Florida, and again, that'll also be on the website, the location. We're going to do advanced airway assessments prior, and we have to focus on sleep. That's the primary first in the order. And then once we understand that piece of it, then we can start working on putting everything else in the keystone or cornerstone in place, so everything else can come back. So once we figure out deep sleep, then we move to the next level, microbiome. And we start talking about, all the way up the triangle, whether it's mindset, but mineral imbalancing, severe deficiencies, combustion, and all those types of things. But so our retreats are going to offer quite a bit of this biofeedback, and then bioenergetics, the latest tools, of course, using nature in itself, grounding you while you're there. And then if your body is too vata pitta, or like you said, in Ayurvedic, we'll do these analysis to see like what your diet should be, more cooling, more warming, which is a frequency again, that's inducive to what you need. You know, your liver probably needs cooling right now, so we're going to put you on this more of a juice diet, where other people aren't you know, their combustion's solid, but you know, they're constipated, for example. So, you know, everyone's a little different in their healing cycle. So that's what these retreats will be about, is bio-individuality. And then we're going to provide these sleep techniques, and then you're going to have good feedback when you leave to know where you should start. So
yeah, I love you know, what your work is going to be quite revolutionary, because what you've basically done, Patrick, at least from my perspective, is you've taken like what makes the body operate like super efficiently and well. And then you've taken the environment, right? Whether it be a retreat center, you've worked with businesses, homes. It's like, okay, like there's our internal environment, just the vessel in which we live. And then there's the external environment, whether it be our work life, our home life, you know, where we spend our days, right? Where we spend our evenings sleeping. I mean, if people could really dial in the future, I mean, a big part of like healing in the future, from my perspective, is getting like healing homes that are like, you know, really, really conducive to healing, work environments, like you said, a retreat center. So it's like revolutionary in the sense that get the body working really, really well, get the environment supporting the body, and then, you know, we can all heal. But, you know, that's a big
well,
task.
looking at stress as a total load of stress, not just one form of it. You know, so if you get rid of all of these layers of stress that you can control, then you have a much more likelihood of getting rid of stress that you can't control. So if you have a chronic infection, let's say, and you fix your sleep, and then you remove the bad inflammatory components of the diet, and you start going into the more of your frequency-based healing, now you're removing layers of stress, adding energy, and now your body can tackle those things that are much more stealth, that you don't even know you have. You know, you have these hidden viral infections, or you have these other, you know, body burdens from stealth inflammation. Now it can go tackle those things and get back to work. So it's just teaching people that concept, that if they remove as many layers of stress, you're much more likely to be able to handle that stress. So like imagine a stack of paper, and you can't tear it, it's too big. But if you get as many layers of paper off that stack, now you can tear that on your own. So that's your immune system. Now your immune system can handle whatever you're throwing at yourself, because your stack is low enough where you can handle a certain amount of stress. So the game is adapting to stress and getting the body adapted back, using grounding as a tool to get back there, and hopefully maintaining your health so you don't have these problems in the future. It's just one tool. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be if we could get not people just, you know, to see this layer of their own being, but also I love just the environment piece, just bringing it into making the world that we live in conducive to human life thriving, but optimizing our health. Like people are truly suffering because of so many stressors, like whether like, again, it be gut based or work based or relationship based, or, you know, viruses, mold, toxicity, it's man-made chemicals.
But they all have one thing in common. It's lack of energy. You know, you're not.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's out. You knew that. You know, of course, you're a practitioner, and it's just to remind myself that you're low on energy for whatever reason, and that needs to be restored. So understanding that piece of the puzzle is a good one. You know, after you get the physical issues out of the way, brainstem tension or a cervical spine impingement, let's say, or something going on with the meninges in the spine where it's attached to the other layers of the spine, causing energetic issues. You know, and the flow of energy through the spine is contingent on the tissues as well. So the physical piece has to be looked at as well. It's not all about energy.
Yeah, I know that's been a thing that's in the summit. You know, I have my energy people, and I know the importance of the emotional body, and it's so important, which is why we are dealing with it in the summit. And I also understand that energy is very subtle but extremely profound. But I can't stress enough as you, which I don't know that sometimes people think, oh, I can come up from the emotional body and skip the physical body, which if everything is energy, right? If everything has a frequency and it's energy, then you can't ignore the physical. I mean, this is our vehicle and you
Right.
can't skip the vehicle. So thank you for saying that because it's so important. And I've really appreciated our time. Before we end, how can people find you? And yeah, if you have a free, it's not required, but if you have a free gift or a promotional code, you can share that now, or I can share it later.
Yeah, I mean, synced with nature, which is on, the site, is the best way to reach out. And we'll offer up promotional items around grounding and of course for retreats. And we're going to offer up, 3, 5, 7, and I think 14-day retreats for people who need to come longer at some locations in the US and Mexico, or maybe Costa Rica. So we're working on that now. So that's what we'll offer up. And then, there'll be other promotional items that our manufacturers I work with, I think, will provide, like body assessments and being able to use all the tools when they come to the retreats, to test, energetics and things like that. So.
Patrick, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I know it's gotten talking about the circadian rhythm, it's gotten dark on us, but I
Yeah.
appreciate you meeting with me this evening and giving me just time to share your truth and your knowledge with everyone.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Best of health, and I'll talk to you soon, Paige.
Okay, thanks.